So honored to welcome Madam President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf here at the Center for Global Development. She's a huge leader and inspiration and friend to our organization. And we're also so pleased to co-sponsor this event with the Princeton School for Public and International Affairs and Emerging Public Leaders, led by Betsy Williams. And this is a really important time to have this conversation because next week is the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit, where we're going to see the pivotal role of sub-Saharan Africa acknowledged, but also the need to work more as equals. And I think those were the words of Secretary of State Blinken directly. It's exciting to see. Our CGD fellows have much to suggest. We've written so many blogs, and I encourage you to read them all. But one of the most important parts of it that Jude Moore, my colleague, highlighted was the need for investments in a resilient and innovative future. And that's what this panel is all about. This panel is about U.S.-Africa partnership to develop and encourage public leadership. And we're particularly excited about this topic because CGD was founded by Ed Scott, who is an incredible person, but who funded the very important Scott Fellows program, of which many alumni are sitting here today, people who went from all over the world to serve with President Johnson Sirleaf's government at its start, about public service and development talent, and sort of that is what we're going to talk about today. So welcome. I would just say this is a hybrid event. If you have questions, we'll take questions from the audience at a certain point. But if you're watching virtually, if you could write your question or comment under our YouTube feed, or on Twitter @CGDev, #CGD Talks, or by email events@cgdev.org. So now I'll turn it over to our first virtual speaker, Dean Amani Jamal, who is the Dean of Princeton School of Public and International Affairs. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Good morning to those of you who are there in Washington and around the United States, and good afternoon and evening to all who are joining us virtually from around the world. I am Amani Jamal, the Dean of the School of Public and International Affairs at Princeton University. We are thrilled to partner with our friends from the Center on Global Development and Emerging Public Leaders on today's event that will explore exhilarating public service leadership in Africa. I want to especially thank two of our alumni and stellar members of the Princeton SPIA Advisory Council, Cindy Wang and Betsy Williams, for their leadership in organizing this event. Both Betsy and Cindy have devoted their careers to public service. Cindy is a senior fellow at the Center for Global Development, where much of her work in recent years has focused on addressing the ongoing humanitarian crisis related to global migration. Betsy is the founder of the Emerging Public Leaders, which is working in Ghana, Kenya, and Liberia to train the next generation of public servants. Thank you both for hosting this important gathering today. Please allow me to also introduce my colleague, Nolan McCarty, who's the Vice Dean for Strategic Initiatives and the Susan Dodd Brown Professor of Politics and Public Affairs here at Princeton SPIA. He is joining us virtually. Nolan has led our strategic planning process over the last 2 years, which has resulted in a number of initiatives to help expand the school's presence both here in Washington, D.C. and internationally. Welcome, Nolan. It is so timely for us to come together around the topic of exhilarating public service leadership in Africa on the verge of what is certain to be an historic U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit in Washington next week. For us at SPIA, it is also timely because expanding our internationalization efforts is one of my top strategic priorities as Dean. This academic year, we have placed a particular focus on strengthening our recruitment efforts and research partnerships with entities in Africa and creating pathways for African leaders to study public policy and translate that knowledge into careers as public servants. Training students for public service is the foundational part of our mission and is at the core of our curriculum at SPIA. We are very fortunate to have some dynamic faculty across a number of academic disciplines who have been conducting research related to Africa for quite some time. For instance, Professor Leonard Wachikan is also the founding president of the African School of Economics and is currently examining the externalities of colonial schools in Africa. Professor Sanya Majolo is focusing her work around the social determinants of health. Jennifer Widener has examined African law and politics. Chika Okeoglo directs Princeton's program in African Studies and is director of the Africa World Initiative. These are just a few of our key faculty working on public policy issues related to Africa. Our students are also quite active with their exploration of public policy issues in Africa. This year, a group of them formed the Africa Policy Network to remain abreast of emerging policy issues in the region. We have also had student groups traveling to Egypt, Ethiopia, and Ghana this year for public policy related study and research, and we're hoping to host a delegation of students from Africa this spring here at SPIA. As we continue to build and refine our internationalization strategy, we are cognizant of the fact that last year students from sub-Saharan Africa comprised only about 4% of the total number of foreign students enrolled at US colleges and universities. We want to increase that number. I am pleased that this fall, our graduate admissions team made a dedicated effort to recruit African students and leaders to our public policy programs. Our team spent 2 weeks recruiting students in 5 African countries, including a stop in Liberia, where they were hosted by the team at the Ellen Johnson Sirleaf Presidential Center. We were so delighted to welcome Madame Sirleaf to campus in 2018 and are deeply honored that she is here today to be part of this event. We look forward to her wisdom and insights. In addition to student recruitment in Africa, we are also focused on building short-term institutes and information exchanges, workshops and internships, and creating opportunities for our faculty and students to collaborate on research with their peer faculty and students from African universities. In the conversations that will take place today, we hope to begin exploring new and emerging models that promote public service in Africa and thinking of ways we can begin to develop or refine our partnerships. There are so many ways that we can work together, and we are excited about the possibilities. So thank you. Thank you to everyone for being here today. We are thrilled you are joining us, and we look forward to the dialogue and continued collaboration. And now I will turn the program over to Princeton alum Betsy Williams, founder of Emerging Public Leaders, who will introduce our keynote speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Amani, and thank you, Amanda. It is a pleasure to be here with the Emerging Public Leaders, the Princeton School of Public and International Affairs, and the Center for Global Development, 3 organizations promoting the impact that occurs when smart policy and smart people are at work. My role is to introduce Her Excellency Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. Introduce is the wrong word, however. Just being called Her Excellency signals she's the real deal. The former president of Liberia, the first woman to be democratically elected head of an African nation, winner of the Nobel Peace Prize and the Ibrahim Prize for African Achievement. There, introduction, complete. What I'd like to share instead are 3 of the many lessons I've learned from working alongside President Sirleaf for more than a decade. First during her administration with the Scott Fellows, and then, since then, in founding President's Young Professionals Program in Liberia and Emerging Public Leaders, to promote African governments with talented, dedicated, innovative, and ethical civil servants. Lesson number 1, be bold. Whether it is the candor with which she speaks, the grand scale of her aspirations for Liberia or for our global society, or her fondness for shockingly spicy hot sauce, Madam is always bold. Lesson 2, exude clarity. This can be rare in public leaders who avoid making commitments. Not President Sirleaf. She is clear on the mission and she expects similar clarity from everyone around her. For the first 10 years I knew her, I don't think I saw her smile. The job of rebuilding her country's infrastructure, restoring democracy, delivering services, and creating space for civil society was too urgent. Finally, lesson 3, Amuje, keep moving up. Be relentless in pursuing what is right. Continue learning and be generous, share generously what you have learned with others. Be bold in your dreams and ambitions. Madam is constantly on Zoom calls and appearing on stages like this one. Her global travel schedule would exhaust someone half her age. President Sirleaf, you will surely share more lessons in your remarks this morning. And with a topic so close to your heart and so central to your legacy, I hope we will see you smile. Please welcome warmly, Madam Ellen Johnson Sirleaf.
No. Both of them have. I think that. All right. This is fine. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. All right. Somebody's gonna give me time, right, for stuff. All right, great. Good morning, everybody. Those in the room and those. Oops, sorry about that. And those joining us virtually. Madam President, good morning. It's good to see you, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you here to the Center for Global Development. Like Amanda was saying, CGD has been connected to Liberia, and a lot of CGD people have come through Liberia. Todd Mars, Amanda, Radlett, Honig, Blattman, I could go on. This morning, though, this question is about public leadership across the continent, and so I want to start with, well, Liberia. And what was it like? I didn't join you until 3 years in, so what did you find? The country had been destroyed by war, and when you came back to rebuild the country in terms of public leadership to deliver on the things that you wanted to do, could you just talk to us about what it looked like when you came back to Liberia?
Very well, but let me start off by saying good morning to everybody and thanking those who have arranged this, all of those at the Center of Global Development, and also those of you coming from Princeton with Betsy Williams. You've noticed that we've decided to do this differently. Instead of mine giving a long talk, like a keynote, we've decided we're going to make it fun for you. And that way, Judy and I are going to just talk, and I hope at some point you'll have an opportunity to pitch in and add your own voice of experience to the topics that we discuss. To get back to Judy, when I assumed the leadership of the country in January 2016, our country had faced 2 decades of civil war. And so that meant a collapsed economy, dysfunctional institution, destroyed infrastructure. We had to address the lack of creditworthiness and reputation of our country. And so we set about saying, okay, what do we do? Of course, we had to put our emphasis on growth. And for that, we had to make sure that the economy was resuscitated by looking at our major drivers of the economy, our mineral sector, our ocean sector, and our agriculture, make sure that we got them back on focus. And then, the big things that we get support from our partners, World Bank, African Development Bank, bilateral, multilateral partners, to start rebuilding the roads and the schools. But there was the one thing that we knew we had to address, but was the most difficult to address: capacity. Did we have the capacity to deliver the public service required to ensure that you would implement successfully with impact those programs and projects that came out of our agenda and our vision? And so, Judy, that was the biggest thing. So, and of course, you're doing this with serious financial resource constraint. And the fact that everything had to be addressed. Everything was in effect a priority. So one had to come up with priority among priorities to get this done. So quite a challenge.
Can imagine. And it was 2006. So then you have this huge capacity gap. How did you go about addressing it, especially in the public sector? What steps did you take to address them?
Well, we tried to look at where do we get the support. I went first to the UNDP had a program called Talk 10. It's the transfer of knowledge, which was repatriating young people to come back to national service. And we started that. And then I reached out, and I believe one of the places I came was right here. Just, for one talk or the other, I don't remember the topic. But I do remember we talked about our capacity gap. And when we said that, I think we just got lucky because Ed Scott was the chair of CGD at the time, I believe. And we must have made a convincing case on the importance of building capacity. And so because of that, he readily committed $1 million to provide the resources for managing a program of repatriation of young people, Liberians as well as others, that would qualify and that was committed to coming to serve in a country that had so many gaps, and so with that we were able to take off, and I think Betsy, you had a role to play in that. Managing that particular program, and I hope that also enhanced your own commitment to public service. And you've been in it and expanding your role in that regard ever since you managed the Scott program. Subsequently, of course, well, first of all, let's talk about the Scott program. But some of you are, yes, the first one, right? Yes,
Yeah. I was.
He was one of the first one. There were 2 or 3 others that came out of that program, and I must say what they brought to it, just a new commitment, a strong passion, the desire to make a difference, the desire to see capacity building is not a quick fix.
That's right.
When you're dealing with a country that had already had one generation, that have many of whom, percentage of whom had not been having the opportunity for education or for skills training. And so what they brought into our civil service, which of course, most of those in the civil service at that time were those who were just, part of what was left. Because most of our trained people had left the country to seek opportunities abroad. But they brought that momentum. And then, well, if we go on, how do we go on?
Well, so I was gonna add, I was gonna ask 2 more questions, and then I'll open up to the audience. One was, I was a Scott Fellow, Dan was, Steph was, and a number of other people. But to be able to scale that, then we introduce the President's Young Professional. So can you talk a little bit about the President Young? Because now these weren't people who were brought from overseas. These were people who were trained at Liberian universities, people who were from the country. And
I recall that the World Bank had a program called the Young Professional Program. And so what we did was to now say the President's Young Professional Program, PYPP. And with that, and there again, Betsy was very instrumental in putting together a program in which we said our programs of repatriating young people from the United States and other places was well, but not enough. We had to bring some of our national talent into a service, into public service, with them being able to see those coming in as mentors, as collaborators, as helpers, and forming this partnership between the young people. And of course, we had a professional recruitment process.
That's correct.
So that we got the right people who had got good grades in their schools, who were anxious to be a part of public service, who wanted themselves to make a difference. And this PYPP became such a driving force. Our civil service all of a sudden had new impetus. all of a sudden people were rather anxious to be a part of public service because of this. And PYPP has lasted until now.
Yes.
It had some difficulties when our administration changed, when you had changes of people at the public service. But what was achieved was so tremendous because year after year, I understand there's 100 plus
Yeah.
people trained in the PYPP program. And more important, they are still there,
That's correct.
operating at higher level now with much more experience that they can share with the new entrants into public service. And now I understand that the program is now expanding, and it went so well that many other countries saw how effective this was to improve the civil service. And so PYPP then mushroomed into emerging public leaders, and we now have programs in Ghana. Betsy now has programs in Kenya. I was there for the launching of the program in Kenya. We're looking forward to other expansion into Francophone Africa, like in Cote d'Ivoire, into Sierra Leone, Liberia's neighboring country.
That's right.
And it's such a good thing. And, there's nothing more important, a good education, which takes time, good training opportunities for those who will serve in the public, building the character of public service, those who not only have the passion to serve, but the integrity to serve, the courage to stand out for doing what you're supposed to do in keeping with the laws of the land, and the policies of the country. And the fact that we have had over 100 people that have stayed this course and have succeeded in being there and doing well and want to remain there. We still have an obligation to keep moving them further. And some of them have to go for training, higher levels of training. And I think our country ought to be obligated to do that so that they can get specialization and they can also come back and serve. But the more important is to keep feeding new entrants into the public service, keep giving them the opportunity to serve, spreading them. I hope we would now begin to tackle local governance, where projects actually take place when it comes to implementation.
Yes, ma'am.
And so we can get to those levels in our rural areas where there's the least capacity and the least opportunities. If we can expand in such a way that we can provide them with the basic skills that they need for good public service, then we're being good to enhance the overall national capacity and address the gaps that have been for so long.
Thank you, Madam President. I just want one more question and then we'll turn to the audience. And in terms of PYP, I know that 4 of my staff in the President's Delivery Unit were PYPs. They all went on to get advanced degrees and they're back at different levels in the government. So it's been an incredible success. But let's talk about what you're doing now with Amuje and going forward, especially increasing the number of women in public service and raising the next 3 women who will be presidents in African countries after you.
You see, now he's touched upon the other missing piece of it all. The first piece is to get education, knowledge, and training and skills in place for the national capacity, but to have the effective impact and results, you've got to have leadership.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm concentrating. I'm still with the young people. That's why my government had a lot of young people.
This is true.
That took all the responsibility to do everything. I could just sit down, And I see leadership. We have leadership, of course. We have assisting leaders in every country, at all levels in society, in all areas of endeavor, no doubt. But the one area that does not have sufficiency in leadership are women. And I have looked at, and others have done research, studies, empirical evidence on how women conduct leadership. And I dare say that, and I ask you to please do a study on it, prove me wrong or prove me right, that when it comes to honest, courageous, committed leadership, women stand out.
Yes, ma'am.
If you look at the results of the COVID-19 and the leaders that really were bold in addressing that pandemic, you'll find out that many of them were women. But also to say that you need value. Women bring value to the overall development effort.
Yeah.
And that's what's more important, that women have the requisite training, knowledge, abilities to be a part, to contribute to national development endeavor, and they should have the opportunity. And it's not a question of asking for favors. I mean, women have the abilities to compete and to stand ground and to hold higher levels of position. So when you say the AMUJ leaders, I formed the EJS Center for Women and Development. And we have the AMUJ initiative is our flagship operation. We recruit women, and today we have 2 cohorts, group of 15 each, from about 16 African countries that have committed themselves to leadership. They've already invested their time and effort, and they already hold position of leadership, but they've not been able to exceed going into the higher levels where the barriers are. The barriers because of stereotyping, patriarchy, all the things that they face that have stopped women from moving to higher levels. Our thing is to work with them and to have them work with themselves and to have them work with other women leaders who have already reached advanced level of leadership. We have them in our countries. We have them in international institutions. Some of them we know, and they serve as mentors. Former women leaders, women presidents, we all serve. They have a platform of working together. And so we hope that I remain equally committed to promoting that, to get more women into higher levels of leadership position, even as we continue our work with ensuring quality public service through other areas of intervention.
Thank you, ma'am. I would turn to the audience now. Begin first with Funke, and and then we'll take a couple more questions, and then we'll wrap up. Funke.
Thank you so much, Madam Sirleaf. Thank you so much, Madam Sirleaf, for speaking with us. My name is Funke, and I'm a student at the Princeton School of Public and International Affairs. My question is about what you feel is the role of the African diaspora in supporting progress and development on the continent. I know that there's been a lot of energy around engaging the diaspora in supporting kind of private sector growth and development on the continent, but from the perspective of government effectiveness and public service delivery, is there a role that the diaspora can play?
Improving their capacities of being able to understand the needs of their countries, preparing themselves to return home for public service. I think those are the important ones, and the diaspora can also network with their colleagues in the country so that they exchange ideas and experience and whatnot that strengthens those that are at home to provide better public service.
I would just add that, especially for the Sky Fellow program, a lot of us were diaspora, and were called repat. So normally in African countries, non-African people there are called expats. Nationals returning to their countries were called repats. so there is room for diaspora. Sir?
Yes, Richard America, Georgetown University. 2 points. One, we have at the Business School at Georgetown a Women's Leadership Initiative, and perhaps you'd like to have a conversation with them. The director, Kathy Tinsley, Professor Tinsley, served in the Peace Corps in the Central African Republic many years ago, and now they've been working in Rwanda. So it could be that if you'd have common interest, and who knows what would come from such a conversation. Second, I'm helping a new university in Liberia get off the ground. The Baptist Convention is creating a new university. You may be aware of that. It will have a strong business school as one of the key components. And I understand that you're good friends with Bill Gates, George Soros, and and Oprah, and a few other billionaires. So we'd like to talk to you about resources at some point.
Fair enough.
Well, Georgetown, I'm very proud to say I've done, some tinkering at Georgetown with Steve Radley. And so I'll be happy through Steve, if we need to talk somebody else, that anything else I can do in Georgetown, that'd be fine. I do believe that resources can be made available for things like, a good educational system today in countries like Liberia that needs it so desperately. Your challenge, the Baptist Seminary, is to really put
This is
the
the
Baptist Convention. Yeah, I think they've taken over some great areas of land to build that school. Am I correct? Yes. Okay. All right, so Liberia has given its share now.
We'll take one more question from Lee, and then
But
give Madam President a chance to close.
get a good project feasibility study done. It'll then make it easier for us to try to place it before certain people or certain philanthropics for them to look at.
Lee, and then we'll give Madam a chance to
The money
close.
is in the bank.
Yeah. Go ahead, sir.
Oh, they have the money, it's just how you get it.
Good morning, Excellency. My name is Nee Simmons. I'm a new non-resident fellow here at Center for Global Development. One of my mentors used to be your minister. He brought me back to Johnson & Johnson when I was right out of business school, but that's Binya Kesley.
Oh,
So when he left Johnson & Johnson, I was in the corporate finance department, always supporting doing corporate finance and supply chains. And when he said at that time, I think I moved down here, one of the things he said was, I'm going home. And I said, okay, well, let me know how I can help. And one of the things he was saying is, I'm trying to get more Liberian brothers and sisters in the diaspora to support what we're trying to do, And come to find out, he did a pretty decent job. And that's one thing I want to say about that. So I'm still in touch with Binya. I haven't talked to him in a while. And then second thing is I'm Ghanaian American. And Ghana has a special place in the heart for Liberia. A lot of Liberians have contributed to Ghana. I wanted to say we're here to support you guys going forward. So thank you.
let me just tell you, Binya went home. He served well. He came back. He's still at Johnson & Johnson at a higher level. Now tell him it's time he support you and your colleagues so you all can go home. Go tell him that. He's at a high level position.
Madam President, do you have any closing remarks?
just to say that, you know, we still, and maybe our friend from the Baptist Convention might think about that. One of the greatest contribution to countries' development, countries like Liberia, are those who are willing, those who have retired and are willing to serve. You know, people here in this country that have retired from teaching or retired from health services and whatnot, but feel that they're okay, they're comfortable in their pension and whatnot, but still have a passion to serve. We'd like to see some of them offer themselves to say, you know, because much of what we've been able to do, given our limitations in resources and trained people, is to be able to broaden our capacity by those who are willing to serve. People that come out, say, I'll give a year's service, you know, training in this particular institution, or serving in the hospital, or serving in our local government area, anything like that. So Betsy, you can look at a third window.
Madam President, thank you. On behalf of the Center for Global Development, it's such a pleasure having you here. Thank you very much.
Thanks to all of you. Go out and change the world.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. I think you said in the same place if you want to watch the next panel.
Oh, there's another panel.
Yeah, yes, ma'am. Yeah. Oh. You know what? Can you get one from another one of these chairs? She's gonna sit on this one here, so we get another one to put on the stage. Yeah. Let's go. This is. No. Yeah, you're going to get another one. Yeah. Thank you. I think you can. I think yeah. You can. Oh, okay. Okay. Please. Do you guys remember the order? Just right here. Okay. There we go. Please. After. Where am I? Oh, okay. Sure. Yeah, I think I'm here. Oh. We got one more than we needed. Well. Yeah, you just come closer. All right, thanks. We good? Well, this is the second part of our program today. After the conversation with Madam President, we're now talk to people who are active in this space of public leadership in one form or the other. And again, when we're done with this, I'm going to try to go through the questions I have and then give the audience an opportunity, especially those online, an opportunity to be able to ask them questions too. So, but President Sirleaf just talked about public leadership, its role, how we develop leaders. And I think I want to start first with just a lightning round of, reactions to what you heard here today and then what you're doing now. I will start with first, ladies first.
Okay, wow, thank you. Hi, everyone.
Can I just quickly, this is, I forgot I didn't introduce them, but Karen McCauley, she's the founder of Emerging Public. She currently founder of Emerging Public Leaders. Currently runs Emerging Public Leaders from out of Nairobi. Please correct me.
Yeah, that's not accurate.
Okay. Thank you.
I am the interim executive
Interim
director
executive
of
director,
Emerging
wow.
Public Leaders, but the founder of Emerging Leaders Foundation.
There we go. Dan Honig, please, you know what? Just introduce yourself.
At this point. No, thank you. It's really an honor to be here. My name is Dan Honig. I'm a non-resident fellow here at the Center for Global Development. I've had the pleasure of working with emerging public leaders. I was a Scott Fellow. And when I became a Scott Fellow, I was, before that, a student at SPIA. So I touch all of the sort of sponsors here in the mix. And I'm now a professor of public policy at University College London in the UK. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
My name is Bumi Otegbade. I'm from Nigeria. I'm a senior director at Ashoka, which is a global nonprofit that develops change makers around the world. Pleasure to be here. Oh, and before that, I worked for the Innovations for Successful Societies at Princeton University, and then I was a public policy student there as well.
We got a little Princeton thing going here. Steven?
Stephen Petrick, the Director of Graduate Admissions at Princeton. Currently, we're doing a lot of work in Africa to bring African students, African changemakers and leaders to campus. Before that, I was with the UN and various NGOs, a lot of time spent in Africa as well. So delighted to be here. Thank you for joining us.
Great. So I'm just going to go into my questions, and please weave in your reactions to President Sirleaf's comments here earlier today. But Karen, you go around talking to students, you engage young leaders. What would you say, are the things that stand out, especially when it comes to them accessing public service? What are the things that you hear from them, things that, I guess, in terms of barriers and challenges, but also opportunities?
Wow, let me respond to that question by pointing to something President Sirleaf has said over and over, maybe not just in this meeting, but I've had the chance of, actually, I got inspired to start Emerging Leaders Foundation by President Sirleaf. Back in 2010, I happened to have been the spokesperson for young Africans at the African Peer Review Mechanism Heads of States panel. And I get into this room to represent young Africans. And guess what? There's only one woman in the room, head of a government, President Sirleaf, and there were no young or youthful persons. And I wondered what would happen to the continent, to our countries, if only we had a few more women, a few more young people, a few more leaders of integrity and who understand the essence of leadership. That Africa would change, Kenya would change, our countries would change. And so started Emerging Leaders Foundation. And I've had the honor of meeting President Sirleaf a number of times. And there's something she said last that really touched me. She talked about desire and curiosity. That the moment a young person, a leader, an individual, a human being has that sense of curiosity, wanting to know, the thirst, the hunger, then there's nothing impossible that cannot be done. And so as I interact with young people, as we work through emerging public leaders with governments and with young people, I see that individuals who have the sense of curiosity to not just settle, but ask the question, why? Why is society the way it is? Why are things the way they are? Why can't we do things differently? Why can't we try this or try that? That the moment people are restless, of course in a positive way, and get to ask those questions, that it actually makes a difference, and it pushes us to move from the comfort zone to get to the uncomfortable, disturbing space to then say, I need to fold my sleeves and get the work done. And that is what we are seeing with our alumni and fellows in emerging public leaders across the continent, in Kenya, Ghana, and Liberia. And that's why I believe that is the attraction point for many governments in Africa, reaching out to us to say, we would like what you are doing in Kenya, Ghana, Liberia, we would like that in our country, because young people are the present, young people are the partners of tomorrow, and we want to invest in these young people to reap the demographic dividend that we have in Africa.
Thank you, Dr. Honig. So you did service, but sort of led to and culminated you in coming to Liberia as a Scott Fellow when everything, you were there before I was, and worked at the Ministry of Finance. As you look back on that experience and what you've done since, how has it, what are spurred you to want to do more, especially for public leadership? What impact has it had? And looking at the space now, what can you say about that space of creating public leaders across the continent?
Yeah, thank you. And I think, in some ways I've spent the last, is it now 15 years, working on the things that I think I learned when I had the honor to serve in the government of Liberia and in Madam President's government. And I think some of the key lessons are some of the things that Madam President was remarking about just earlier today. The first is, as Madam President left the stage, she said, go out and change the world, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the things I learned in Liberia is that, it is not an easy task to change the world or to change a country. I do not mean to suggest that in the least, but they do change. And when they change, it's because people who have that restlessness, I just went and looked at the 2006 Liberian Civil Service Strategy and Madam Sirleaf's, Madam President's preface to that strategy. She writes there, to transform the civil service, we need to bring in new ideas and new energy, but we also need to motivate. We need to have a motivated civil service, that we need the drive to transform. And part of that comes from people coming in from the outside, as we were talking about earlier, as EPL worked so ably under Executive Director Willa Cully's leadership to do. But some of it comes from motivating those who are already there. And that's kind of where my work has turned, to sort of how we create the space for, and how we inspire the many bureaucrats, the many civil servants who we might think are unmotivated, but in fact are demotivated, and with different management structures, with different opportunities, can be part of positive change. And I think the dying, and in some ways the link with Ashoka's work, in my mind, I had the pleasure of working for Ashoka in Thailand before I came to Liberia, is the power of people and ideas, the power of people inside the system, outside the system, with the ideas and in the Portuguese vontade, the will to change, the will to make things different. And I had so many visceral lessons there in Liberia, and being able to be a very, very small part of a very big team trying to make that change. And I am, and I think I will always remain incredibly grateful for the opportunity to learn those lessons and been a part.
Yeah, you're not alone, brother. But Bumi, I want to come to you. But just before I do, next week is the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit, and this whole a part of these events that we're doing is in the lead up to that. And one of the things that the U.S. government has done, at least from 2010, is this YALI program, Young African Leaders Initiative, where they bring in. But I guess one of the most prominent pieces of that is the Mandela Fellows, that brings in young Africans. But something similar to what the U.S. government is doing is already happening in the private sector, say with EPL. But Ashoka Fellows comes to mind, and what Ashoka does, comes to mind. So could you talk to us a little bit about what you do, how it fits into this entire leadership training and preparing people for service?
Yeah, I identify as a social entrepreneur. And my path to public leadership is just curiosity, following curiosity. Every young person in Africa knows the power shouldn't be going out. We know the road shouldn't be the way it is. And we are constantly trying to find. So in that search, my plan was robot tractors for agriculture.
Okay.
And I went to undergrad in Texas. I did a lot of research in automatic control, got into a PhD program to continue it. And then I had a chance to go home in Nigeria, and it looked like there were 30 million young people, no job. Okay, well, maybe they can do the work. And
Instead of the robot tractor.
Instead of the robot tractors. I am still interested in the robot tractors.
Of course.
But it then started this journey of searching how exactly and what fits who I am. And over the next decade, I would work on youth pathways, especially around career That's what led me to public service. And so I would work alongside government. And what social entrepreneurs do is they see entire ecosystems and then pull the incentives together so that everyone's operating in a solid way. To give an example that's been really exciting to me, there's a recently elected Ashoka Fellow. His name is Dixon Chibanda. He's out in Zimbabwe. He was one of 13 psychiatrists in a country of 16 million people. We know the history of Zimbabwe, right? It's been very difficult. Dixon didn't have, 13 psychiatrists. This is crazy. He essentially figured out that you can work with grandmothers. Grandmothers are the safest space for everybody, most people. He created something called a friendship bench. And so they would take grandmothers, they would train them with some mental health resources, etc. And then that was it, So that's spread across the country. It's a model that's I know they have friendship benches in Brooklyn. It was in Qatar for the World Cup this time. Just those kinds of ideas. But it's that idea of, can you change something, and what can you change, and how can you pull an ecosystem together to make it work? Of course, for the grandmothers who are typically at home, not doing very much, this is a new lease of life. And I think that's where Ashoka's work comes in, is we have this new movement around the Everyone a Change Maker movement. And my work is particularly around young people, 0 to 10, 10 to 20. Can we spark a sense of change in you, your power to contribute change? And I think that one of the key ideas I took away from what Madam President said is take young people seriously from the start. I had the chance to work with many presidents, including our presidency in Nigeria. Our vice president, Professor Yomi Osinbajo, he takes young people seriously. Same thing. You know what, all of you, you're smart, good, just come. Okay, this is the challenge, figure it out, And what it does is it provides one, access. And then two, experience. And those two things together in the hands of a younger person is remarkable. And I'm really proud of Princeton for coming here. I was at Princeton, I think, between 2018 and 2020. And not that long ago, this wasn't really a thing, at least from my perspective. And one of the things I had done while I was at Princeton is to say, hey, can we have leaders from the continent come here? Can we have young people who are here do this work with us? And I think Princeton has responded really well. I had a chance to bring President Nana Akufo-Addo of Ghana to Princeton. And this is the interesting thing, worked with all the 18, 19-year-olds there to plan and execute. And Princeton also takes young people seriously, very seriously. And so at 20, you've already done all the negotiations to bring your president to your university. That's all you need to hand over, is that early belief, access, and that experience.
That's incredible. Thank you. And Stephen, I'd like to come to you now. During World War I, around the time of World War I, 1914 to say 1916, the entire population of the continent was close to 110 million. By 2050, a quarter of the people living will be Africans. The amount of leadership, especially in the public sector, that is required, and the amount of training, institutions of higher learning become a significant piece. So, no pressure. How has Princeton addressed this leadership training in Africa? Ignore everything I said before.
By events like this, is one of the things. So as Amani Jamal mentioned in her sort of opening, and sort of a shout out to Nolan McCarty, who's leading the strategic plan, but we're in the midst of sort of a strategic plan at SPIA, sort of thinking about how we really lean into internationalization and what does that mean. It of course means sort of recruiting students to Princeton. That's sort of the central to sort of all that panelists have talked about, everything that we're trying to sort of accomplish in terms of sort of building capacity, leadership capacity, future leaders. To that end, we were in Africa this fall, focused specifically on the West right now. We were in Ghana, Liberia, Cote d'Ivoire, Mali, and Benin. We were also in Tunisia, Egypt. We have groups going this winter to Kenya. We'll be in South Africa. So sort of really thinking about sort of the entire continent from a student perspective. But beyond that, it's also sort of how do we think about research and faculty exchanges? How can we sort of build partnerships and collaboration along sort of just research and things that the faculty are doing? Events like this, where we're partnering with NGOs, other academic institutions, governments, so that the conversation is sort of two-way. When we really think about internationalization, it's not, Princeton flying in for 2 days and going out. It's how do we sort of engage with people from Kenya, Ghana, Liberia, et cetera, and sort of work with them as true partners in the fullest sense of the what that means, And this is really a sort of what SPIA and Princeton in general is sort of exploring, is how do we sort of build some of these partnerships to leverage Princeton's capacity, its name, about access, so what that means for students. I'm working on the student part, but there's a number of people sort of in this room and at the university who are working sort of at all of these sort of levels of how do we think, big picture and sort of in an integrated manner across all these dimensions.
I just to go back on that, and I heard you talk about researchers and people. Is the strategic plan also taking into account, let's say, partnership with African institutions of higher learning? Is this something that's been considered?
So it's definitely in the mix. Okay. How that works and how we sort of bring that together is to be determined. One example might be right now we have built out partnerships between Princeton and 5 HBCUs in the United States.
Okay.
That's already happening. There's already research, collaborations, exchanges, faculty are working together. So that might be one model we use to think about how we do this in Africa. I mean, we're sort of in the year of strategic planning right now, so how that looks, how that comes together remains to be seen, but it's certainly sort of part of the conversation.
Thank you. I'll go with one more round of questions, and then we'll go to the audience. Karen, I want to come back to you about the importance of developing this pipeline of leaders, but where institutions of higher learning like Princeton, but the local ones that we have too in Kenya and elsewhere in East Africa, where it comes in your program as you develop new leaders?
So where we do our recruitment from is we target university graduates.
Okay.
So that is the process in Ghana, Liberia, and for Kenya. We have young graduates who are already in government at entry level.
Okay.
So education, learning, educational capacity, academic qualifications are critical in the entry level in government or in the entry level in our programming that we do. But beyond that, I'd definitely love to state that academic qualifications are not enough.
Okay.
Sometimes experience is not enough. Sometimes exposure is not enough. The cutting edge or the tipping point for individuals to make a difference as leaders, like President said, the core of development, sustainable development, is leadership. And so I believe that this far I have worked and this far we've done the work with emerging public leaders. I have seen, I have observed, and rightfully so, that to go the extra mile, it takes heart. We have individuals in positions of authority, not necessarily leaders, who are all about amassing, to have a sort of self-identity in the money they have, the titles, and all that stuff. But unless you have heart and you choose to lead from the heart and you choose to see people as people, you choose to look at inequalities and poverty, not just as numbers and statistics, but as families, as children, as men, women, human beings, individuals, citizens. And unless you are courageous enough to actually take that step and see people for people and choose to serve with heart, then academic qualifications are nothing and exposure titles are nothing. And a bit of that is what we are trying to nurture in our leaders, that can our leaders go the extra mile? Can our leaders serve? And can we lead by example? Because talk, everybody can talk, but actions are what carries the day. So leading by example, but leading from the heart. And again, like President said, during the pandemic, the heads of governments that led change and led their countries to health and global health were countries led by women. So what is it about women leadership that we would need to embrace as a society, as a globe, to then lead sustainably and lead from the heart? I believe that is critical.
I think that's a really good point. One of the things I know, I don't know if the number changed, but almost every single Scott Fellow, Liberian Scott Fellow who went back to the country, stayed even after the thing ended. Some of them stayed in government, but others went into something else. And I should say that when the Scott Fellowship ended and we accepted the offer from the Liberian government, it was a 57% pay cut. So Dan, I want to come to you on this about the next step, because we can scale Scott Fellows, we can scale emerging public leaders, but not every single public leader is going to come through that program. There are people already there who are leading. Yeah. What can be done with the people who are already there so that the same outcomes we're looking for in EPL and elsewhere, we're still able to see it? Because that, if we scale that, then in combination with the programs we're talking about, you can imagine the amount of change that will come to countries.
Absolutely. So I couldn't agree more with the premise that, the question is how we amplify this leadership, how we have it kind of propagate throughout the system, throughout the public service. And I think in different ways we've all talked about the power of people seeing their ability to make change, right? The power of seeing that if I do something, it makes a difference if I'm there, if I'm the one who is in that seat versus somebody else, right? And I think the way that we do this, my view is that one of the ways that leaders lead from the heart, and to me, I know of no empirical research on this, Madam President, I should say, but to me, what I found distinctive about the best, in my language, mission-driven bureaucrats, the best public servants who do overwhelmingly, in my experience, seem to be women, is that they lead by supporting others, by giving others throughout the system an opportunity to see their power to make change, to see that they are trusted, that it matters that it is them who holds the job rather than somebody else. And I think, where I see the potential to amplify all of these efforts is by thinking about how we build structures to take what we all experience, what Scott Fellows experienced coming in at relatively senior levels, right? What emerging public leaders experience, those opportunities, and have them support others, have systems that even don't have these programs, support others, support those within the public service currently to have those opportunities and grow. And if we can transform using, to the extent possible, the people who are already there, who also see that it's not right, that the electricity doesn't turn on and the roads don't get built, right? Who also want to make change, many of whom came to the public service specifically because they wanted to make that change. And giving them that opportunity, that structure, that supportive management is, to me, the way to scale this impact. Thank you.
So I'm going to ask you the same question. There are a lot of organizations, including the ones that were mentioned here today, that are trying to do these things and trying to scale them. In your view, at least from your perspective, as you look at the problem, as you look at this issue of public leadership, what is missing? What is still, what are the pieces that still need to be brought together for us to be able to see at scale the kind of changes we want? I will start with you, Bumi.
It's a very big question.
Yeah.
But since we're at the Center for Global Development,
it has to be.
A decision, commitment to women, a decision, a commitment to young people, and that's just what I'm going to do. And I think that organizations like this can unearth leaders who already think this way, already have this mindset. I think at Ashoka, we talk a lot about the mindset shift. Because there's so many programs and policies and things we want to do. But if you get only 4 people in the room who have the same mindset, about young people or about women, then you know. So I don't have any big recommendation except let's huddle a little bit more with the people who have the same mindset. And then let's dig out those leaders who already were going to do that anyway. They were already going to put women. And it's funny, we're having a panel, I talk about women a lot, and when I look back on my years of working with public servants in Nigeria or in Kenya, it was the women that actually helped me get through a lot of the difficult points, and because they managed expectations a lot better, right? They came from the professional private sector and went into public sector, and just did a much better job of expectation management. So it was easier for us to provide our services and do that. When I reflect on that, I have a couple of names, right? And then maybe the other thing too is just more and more of this. Again, lots of gratitude to Princeton. I was just not the typical student, if you will. But when I walked into my classroom and I met my Indian classmate, Rohit, his whole perspective on civil servants was completely foreign to me. Mm-hmm. Civil servants don't do anything. They stay at home and just, and then they can never get fired, so they get rotated, and that's just what I know of civil servants. But Rohit was like top of the class, top of this, top of the. I don't understand. I thought you said you're a civil servant. Why are you so good at calculus? Completely different worldview, and that alone. If I had just gone back home to Nigeria after that experience, complete different mind space. So those two things I think I would encourage.
Yeah, I would agree with sort of having more conversations like this, more dialogue with sort of diverse panelists, diverse people in the audience. I agree sort of about the leading with heart, sort of everything that's already been said. One thing I would sort of add, and this really sort of gets at part of what we try to do with our training at Princeton, is just sort of using data and teaching people sort of quantitative skills, quantitative analysis, such that they can sort of make sense of massive amounts of data, trends, and not losing sight of the people and sort of the families behind that, but sort of what is that data telling us, and what is that sort of going to help us sort of help us in our decision making. And so I think that is sort of something that these academic institutions can offer for future leaders, change makers, in terms of how they can sort of make sense of sometimes things that aren't always clear.
Excellent, makes sense. Now at this point, we'd like to give the audience an opportunity to interact with the panelists. So those online, those here in the audience, do you have any questions? All right, so we'll go with the guests first. Yeah, sir, right here.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to direct my question to Karen and Bhumni. So, I study a little bit of policy making in the African continent and identify a couple of ills. So I want to know how you do incorporate nepotism, tribalism, and corruption in the public service in Africa. Because if you don't address those key things, those are the key issues that impact development in the African continent. Then, if you wouldn't mind, my other question is to Stephen. So I'm just wondering, you talk about having partnership with historical black colleges and universities. Have you considered maybe, say, setting up satellite campus in Africa? Because sometimes some people don't get visas, or maybe the folks that are working in public service, can you create maybe some opportunities for them after work program to maybe continue their education? That is another way also to enhance skills or talent. Thank you.
Excellent question. I'll take another question and then we'll turn to the audience. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Okay. Madam President wants to ask a question.
Social media provides what it's intended to do. It's an effective tool for education, for communication. How do we address the damaging effect of social media, how this might undermine efforts to achieve certain development goals?
All right. Yeah, that's like the easiest of the questions that were asked today. I will start with you, Stephen. One is,
I can certainly speak
Yeah.
to sort of this. So one thing that comes to mind is we have a faculty member, Leonard Wanchakan, who started the African School of Economics in Benin. There's also campuses in Cote d'Ivoire and Nigeria. And so this is one way that Princeton is sort of supporting schools based in Africa, in African countries, and sort of a lot of it is very similar to the curriculum that we're teaching at Princeton. In terms of visas and all that, we certainly understand the challenges. Sort of in my time at Princeton, every international student we've admitted, we've been able to bring to campus. So sort of on the two levels, we're committed to bringing people to Princeton, training them up at Princeton, and then putting that education, that knowledge back out into the world. And then there are these partnerships like with the African School of Economics, for example, that we are sort of involved with, supporting, and keenly sort of following sort of what that's doing in terms of its impact for students, that country, region, any ripple effects and follow-on effects from that type of work.
just before you come in, Bowman, I think it's worth repeating. If the U.S., as Secretary of State Blinken says, is seeking an equal partnership with Africa, training African leaders, such a big thing that something has to be done about the visa procedure and how difficult it is for the average African student to be able to get a visa to come to the U.S. Something has to be done. So hopefully next week is something that comes up. But he talked about corruption and nepotism. I mean, that definitely affects recruitment into public service. One of the things I will always be grateful for was that I got to work for a president that I didn't know. I didn't know anybody in the president's office. I didn't have any connections. We were professionally recruited. And the entire staff that I had in the presidency also had no connections. They were all professionally recruited. But that story stands out because that's not how it normally happens. Mm-hmm. So how do you figure out the thing he was talking about with emerging public leaders and stuff like that?
One of the things or components of our program and our curriculum that stands out is the meritocratic nature of our recruitment. Our recruitment process is so rigorous because then the process of entry into the program determines the quality of the leaders you have in the program. So for us, meritocracy is critical. But once individuals are already in the program, we have different components of the curriculum, like policy making processes, implementation, and all that. But we also have field experience and exercises where our fellows go to the field and become publics or citizens seeking services and get to see how citizens are treated. And then we go back and take notes and see, so what needs to change, and begin to have practical projects by fellows around that. Something that is so critical that we do that I love very much is storytelling. I realize that when you listen to stories of people, you stop judging. When you listen to stories of communities and people, you embrace them wholeheartedly. And so part of what we do in our curriculum is embrace storytelling and support these young leaders to embrace storytelling, tell their stories, but also go to the communities, because we have moments when they are not just going through classroom training in the big cities, but then they go to different communities. Let me give the example of Kenya. They go to different regions where there are different ethnic groups, ethnic communities, and so they get to live amongst those people, listen to their stories, listen to their ways of life, see their economic activities, and all that. And that actually helps to, in the words of one of the panelists, shift the mindsets to understand these people are just like us. This community is just like my community. We're all human beings. We're all citizens of this country. And so in doing that, we are actually sort of changing the public service one citizen at a time through these leaders that we then get to nurture. They go back to their communities or their workplaces and they champion this same message. And issues around nepotism, tribalism then do not have much effect. as they would have had they not gone through this particular fellowship that we run.
Thank you, Karen. So as we wind down, I will, Bumi, you take us home, but I'll come to you, Dan, now, and hopefully you can answer that very easy question, President Sirleaf.
So to be sure, I mean, 90 seconds we can probably cover.
Yeah, exactly. But the negative impact of social media on what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah. So I guess I have in mind, Madam President, when I think about the question, misinformation and disinformation that flows through social media, and I have an answer there, which is a little bit. I think social media has become the public square, right? It is the virtual public square through which we communicate. And I think, frankly, our legal regimes vis-a-vis this virtual public square are wrong, because we treat it as a private issue to be regulated, internal to corporations who happen to have developed the platforms. But it doesn't matter if you are the innovator who brings the drug into the system. The drug is regulated by the FDA, right? The social media platform is now public and should be treated as public. And I think there would be advantages to the corporations themselves this way as well, in the sense that, there is some difficulty. What do you let in? What do you do not? Either way, there is a judgment to be made, which is very difficult to make privately. I'm sympathetic to the difficulty of the position. I think we need to treat social media as a public entity and have it regulated as such through public and participatory fora. I'm going to cheat just a little bit if I could, and thank you so much, and respond a little bit to this question about anti-corruption too, which is to say that anti-corruption efforts often focus on attempting to control and observe and monitor. We're going to get less corruption through more transparency, and that is absolutely one mechanism through which it can happen. But another anti-corruption strategy is pride, is motivation. I had the opportunity to speak with Minister Moore about his time at the Ministry of Public Works. And one of the things that really came through in that conversation is the way that instilling a sense of pride and supporting those at lower levels to realize their power to make a positive difference, and recruit and retain those who felt that way, is itself an anti-corruption strategy. And I think we forget about that complementary root, about power and inspiration and leadership as an anti-corruption strategy to our peril. Thank you.
Bumi, we got like 50 seconds. So take us home in 50 seconds.
This has been a very thought-provoking conversation for me. On social media, I don't think we intended to create social media. It's kind of happened, and we're all just living in that world now. I've spent some time with my boss, Bill Drayton, thinking about how could things be different. And there's an idea I've been working on called impact brain. Whether it's change-making or social entrepreneurship or public decisions or policy, we need to figure out what the impact is, and we need to see that clearly. And we just don't. So is there a system, if I tweet something, where I know what is happening to everyone else based on the single action I took? If social media truly were a public square, physical one, I can see how everyone's looking at me. On social media, I can't, right? Yeah. So this idea of impact brain, it's just some kind of a sort of networked AI system or whatever, where there's decision support, right, for what you're doing, whether you're a large organization, or a small one, or if we want to think about the SDGs, think about the future, how do we actually figure out what is the true impact of the actions that we take as individuals, as institutions, and what it means for different groups of people. So that's one idea. I think social media is an accident, and we are trying to get on top of that accident, and that's going to be very difficult.
Well, please, thank you so much. Please join me in thanking the panel. It's been an incredible time. Now, toss it to my colleague, Cindy.
Thank you so much. I have the honor of closing this incredible event. My name is Cindy Huang. I'm a senior fellow here at CGD, and I also have the honor of co-chairing the Princeton Advisory Council for the School of Public and International Affairs. So I will close with a huge thank you to everyone, to Madam President for coming to this event, to EPL and SPIA for co-hosting, and also to Cassie, Sarah, and Hunter, CGD staff, who helped put all of this together. And it's impossible to summarize, but I wanted to close with 3 points. The first is really for all of us to do what Bunmi and others called us to do, which is to listen to young people and take them seriously. That must be the default if we're going to build the future that we want to and we need to together. The second is that leadership and ideas matter. CGD prides itself as a think and a do tank. And while I love numbers and I want to hear return on investment, I also feel we have to create space for what we can't precisely measure, which is the Scott Fellows who went and supported and inspired the transformation of a country under the leadership of Madame President. And so I really want us to think more expansively about change and have these longer time horizons that we've talked about here. Finally, third, hustle. The partnership hustle, even the conversation, the question here, really suggests that we need to bring people and ideas, the doers together, and don't be afraid to raise those big ideas and pursue them. So thank you so much. I want everyone to take the opportunity to think about how you can spark the inspiration to serve in public service and how we nurture that so we can build a better future together. Thank you so much for joining us.